Hey everyone, welcome to Through the Cruft, where we're sharing good things on the internet, one find at a time. Today, we have Mike Rohde on the show to talk about visualization, design, and sketchnoting. We hope you enjoy. It is my privilege today to have Mike Rohde. He's a designer, author, teacher, speaker, illustrator, publisher, podcaster, and family man. Mike, welcome to the show. I'm so glad to have you on.
Hey, it's really great to be on, Corey. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So we're gonna jump right in, right? Like we're gonna go hard right off the gun. One of your statements on your website is the power and value of visualization. You make that phrase, right? The power and value of visualization. So unpack that for me. Tell me what you mean by why you care about the power and value of visualization.
Well, visualization is really important to me because I think it cuts through lots of the things that maybe provide confusion. So I talk about this. I just talked about this today. When I worked in a large company for about 3 years, I did a contract inside a financial services firm. And the one thing I noticed right away was it was very easy to have this illusion of agreement. So in other words, you would both say, oh, we believe in this and we like this and this is how we think things should be. And you could write all day long. But then when you actually got down to it, there would be confusion. And I found that one way to cut through this illusion of agreement more quickly was by visualizing the ideas. Now, in my context, I'm a designer. I was brought into the company on the contract to help build software as a designer, as a user experience designer. So I was working with developers and product owners and product managers and business analysts and so on. So they all had different perspectives, right? So they would come to the table. The developers wanted to do it as fast as possible, and they wanted to use the coolest new technologies. And the business analysts wanted to make sure it met the business needs that they were called by the whoever it was that was calling for it. The product owner wanted to make sure the product was viable and that it got delivered on time. The project managers as well were worried about time. And I came into it with the perspective that it has to be usable. Yeah. Like we can meet all those things, and if you can't use it, then it's missed the mark, right? So when all those things line up, you have a really excellent product. And so seeing that there was so many different perspectives coming to the table, we started a practice pretty early on of weekly whiteboarding sessions. So we were really fortunate in the space we were in. We had this giant floor-to-ceiling whiteboard, and I think it was 20 feet long. So it was quite big. There was 2 tables that were set up next to it with chairs. And what we established, a good friend, business analyst, and I, he was also into doing this visualization, but he could see the perspective of the business analyst and the product. So we teamed up and we would queue up whatever the feature was that was up next because we could see what was being planned. So we'd have this long list of prioritized tasks and we would bring those to the table. We would plan it. And then Monday mornings, we would have team after team come in because the group was big enough. We had, 4 or 5 development teams all working on different pieces of the software. And they would come to the table and we would queue up, all right, what's the feature this team's working on? And we would talk about it. If the software that we were replacing had this feature, we would look at it and say, well, what do we like about the feature? What doesn't work about it? What are some opportunities? Because in this particular context, we were moving from old Windows software to a web-based tool, right, which has got a lot of flexibility. You can run it on all kinds of different machines. So knowing that, what kind of things could we do with it instead of just being bound by what existed? So we would queue it up and we would do these whiteboard sessions. And, I was the primary visual facilitator where I would go to the board with typically 2 markers, like a black and a red or black and a teal or something. And as I listened to people talking about ways to solve the problem, I would be drawing these ideas on the board. And as they would make comments, so I would draw that in black, and as they would make comments about it, or there would be discussion about it, or, things that we wanted to consider, I would use the other marker with red or something, and I would draw arrows and write all the things that were being said. So really I was capturing this live discussion on the board and documenting it. And there were a couple of reasons for that. Number one was what I said, this illusion of agreement was harder to it was harder to see that happen because it was all unfolding in front of them on the board, and they could see like, oh, well, I don't think a slider is the right solution at all. I think it should be radio buttons or whatever the thing was, right? They could see it unfolding in a way that if you simply talked about this idea, you could still hold a concept in your head, and someone else could hold the same concept in their head and still not agree and never realize it, right? Until one of them built it and the other one disagreed, and now you've got to tear apart software. Not always so great. So that's where I really saw the power of it and the value of it, because if we did this on a whiteboard and we could do it as a team, number one, everyone would feel part of the process. Number two, we would have solved the problem together and saved lots of back and forth and bouncing around. And number three, if I became a bottleneck, which was not hard to do because I was one designer with like 50 people, we did a good job of fleshing out the questions. Sometimes we'd have to do it 4 or 5 times to really get to the solution. But after every session, we would take a photo and put it in a shared location. And the idea was, if I got booked up with whatever, didn't matter, a developer could go pull that image that they were part of, and they could pull it up and build the software. And this happened pretty often where the developer would move ahead. All the notes were bound into it. We had the discussion. They were in the room. They remembered it, and this brought back their memory. And then they would code it up and say, "Hey, Mike, take a look. What do you think? I had a few ideas, and I tried these, and they seem to work better." And so it gave us lots of flexibility. So that was the value. Was it probably saved a fair amount of time of rework by doing this upfront work, which seems really, as a software developer, to sit by a whiteboard and draw stuff just seems super inefficient when you want to be on your cool keyboard and your music jamming and coding. But the problem is that in a product like this, where specifically a product like this, there was so much interdependency that you had to consider not only your team, but the other 5 teams that were working on different parts. And even our planning sessions, did this as well, because there were so many different moving parts. We had to, if somebody needed something, they had to tell us, "Hey, we need you to do this thing for us so we can do this thing for these guys." Like, there was so much of that, that it was really important that we get on the same page. So what seems inefficient actually is probably much more efficient, and that's where the value of it came in for me.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of Lean Startup?
Yes.
Yeah. So I got introduced to Lean Startup. There's a couple of things that your discussion there made me think of. So I got introduced to Lean Startup, and so everybody starts using the business model canvas, right? And they start designing these startup experiences or doing customer discovery with this business model canvas, and the tool was fine, and I was like, interested in it and all that stuff. But the thing that I kept pulling back to, and we actually wrote a paper on it, the thing I kept pulling back to is it's the medium that facilitates the conversation. And like that is and then it documents it at the same time, right? So there's a big difference between you and I, we're partners or we're co-founders trying to develop this startup, and we're just talking about it, right? We're talking about it. And they always talk about the napkin, right? We did it on the back of the napkin. And it's like, my thought was, it's the napkin that's the most important thing, or it's the canvas that's the most important thing. And it's not necessarily as visual as you were probably doing on your whiteboard, because it's mainly text, right? It's mainly text that goes into these boxes. But the idea of there's an artifact that isn't you and I that we are mediating around. Like, we're fighting over what goes on that. We're fighting about whether, and fighting is the wrong word, but like, you know what I mean? Like, we're talking about what goes on that, what stays on that, why that's on there. Should it be there or should it be over there? And it sounds like you were doing a very, very similar thing where you were developing, in essence, the canvas, if you will, right? Like you were creating the live canvas to allow people to discuss, to allow people to say, no, that's not what we mean, or no, that's not what I mean. So the second thing I thought of was, if you've ever gone to a concert, right, and you have the person off to the side of the stage with the big canvas, and they're painting while the speaker is either speaking or the music is happening. And that's you. Like, you were there, and you're like flying around throwing paint and marker all over the board. So, no, but that makes sense to me. Like, I totally understand how that's valuable in a design setting, or how it's valuable in a group discussion or group communication type of a setting.
Yeah, and I think you're right in identifying that canvas was sort of a structured way. It sort of forces you to step through the things that you need to think about, right? It's making sure you don't miss anything. So every time you go through the canvas, you have to fill in a square, and if the square is not filled in, it's not done,
Yep.
right? So in this case, you're right. I was sort of building a live canvas with the materials that we had, so that's like another level, even more bespoke, right, to the situation. So, and making sure to ask questions, and the thing I loved the most, I really enjoyed being up there drawing, but what I loved even more was when a developer would say, "Oh, Mike, I have this great idea," and I would hand the marker, hold the marker out and wait for them to come up, and they would come up and draw, and they got excited about drawing up there, and they would say how, well, my drawing is not as good as yours, Mike. And that's okay. Like, it was really more about them expressing and thinking, and I think they really enjoyed that, and so that was really fun when they would come forward. And the other thing that my friend Ian would often say, he would be sitting on the table and he'd be watching, because I'm pretty intently listening and drawing. I often wasn't looking at the people because I was just listening, right? I didn't need to see anything. I just heard it. It was coming in my ears. So I'm sitting there drawing. Usually I'm hiding what I'm drawing, right? And I would step aside and Ian would say, "How did you know what I was thinking?" That's freaky, right? So, but it's just because I was really in tune. We really had, there's sort of a spirit in the space, in some ways, where we sort of got all on the same wavelength. And when that happened, we really created some really interesting software out of that, and the journey was fun as well as the result.
Yeah, I know one of your, I don't know if it's a theme or what you would call it, but you have merchandise that's related to what we're going to talk about later with sketchnoting and all that stuff. But one of them is ideas, not art, right? Like in the driver is ideas, not art. Can you tell us, exactly what you're trying to get at with that?
Yeah. So I wanted it to be a little bit provocative, but I think it can be a little deceiving, not intentionally so, but so one of the challenges I faced when I started getting into sketchnoting was I kept running into people when I would try to teach it. They would say, "Oh, I can't draw, I can't sketchnote." Like, well, it's not really a good solution. Why do you not feel like you can do this thing? And they'd say, "Well, I can't, because I can't do art." So like, well, we're not really doing art. So I kept on running into this and thinking, okay, what would be a really simplistic way to express my thought around this? And I realized, a lot of people, when they go through typically grade school, middle school, right in that age, you sort of run into this situation where somebody's typically really good at art, like they're much better. And if you're nowhere near as good as them, you just sort of give up and you stop drawing, right? It's really common. And I've seen this so many times, hundreds of times, when I go into these workshops where I teach people that it's a little bit scary, because a lot like public speaking, it can be revealing. So if you're a powerful CEO or something, and you can't draw better than your 14-year-old daughter or something, or your 5-year-old kid or something, like that can be really embarrassing. So you just don't do it, right? Yeah. Or you're always apologizing for it. And so what I realized was there's some kind of art baggage that exists just simply because of the way art was taught, and sort of the nature of kids being mean to each other in grade school. That not everybody thinks art is such a great thing because they don't feel like they can do it, and it suddenly becomes a separator, and it makes them feel worse, right? So the approach here is that we're dealing in ideas. That's what I always open with, is we're dealing in the currency of ideas, not art. We're dealing in boxes and squares and circles and lines, and it doesn't have to be perfect, and we're just communicating concepts to each other or to ourselves. And so it's just amazing. Like when I explain what I mean by that, when I teach these workshops, and this happens in an hour, people who go through the process of drawing the way I teach them, which is really simple, seem like they are able to let go of that burden. It's sort of the burden sort of lifts, because I actually have another way I can communicate. I don't have to be a great artist. All I need are these basic elements. And if I put them together and I think creatively, I can actually do it. And the whole point of these 1-hour workshops is, breaking it down, showing them the elements, and then challenging them to do, an exercise so they can actually experience what it feels like. And that's really key, as I've learned accidentally, that teaching and then having small wins is really valuable for a learner, right?
Yeah.
So small, little, tiny, incremental wins, like being able to draw really simple stuff, could really feel empowering to someone who can't do it at all.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really the core of the Ideas Not Art, is recognizing that art can have baggage. It's really valuable. I think the arts are necessary and important. But for most people, just communicating ideas is much more of a daily activity than, producing a canvas or something.
Yeah. So you've talked about your designer work, right? You've talked about your teaching. You've authored a bunch of books, right? So when I introduced you, you had these different areas where you operate, right? So what do you actually do for a living?
Well, my primary day job is as a designer.
Okay.
I'm a principal designer. I work for a large multinational, international company that does smart buildings.
Okay.
And I'm moving now in my career from user experience design into a broader space, which is called service design. And the idea behind service design is everything that we experience has different components. There might be a physical component, like your computer, let's say, is a physical component. But how did you get the computer? Well, you went to the Apple store, or you went to the store, or you went to Amazon and you bought it, and it got delivered to you. Well, how did you make the decision to buy it? What led you? That was the website and research. Like, there's all these touch points all along the way, from the moment that you think you need a computer to, actually using it, and then what happens when something goes wrong with it and you have to call service. That's all part of this whole life cycle. So it's sort of moving to that level of design, like actually looking at what the process is like, looking for places where there's failures and gaps, and then finding creative ways to prototype and then produce. Either you skip that step because it just continually fails and it's not necessary, or you find a way to make it smoother or change the steps to make the whole service continuously smooth. So, and as we're moving into like this idea of so many different subscriptions, like it's even more, the service idea is just like everywhere.
Yeah. So how do you get into that? Like, what's your background? What training did you have to become first user experience, but then rolling into, I would say that the latter is a lot of experience in the industry, right? But it's like if somebody wanted to come out and do user experience design, or somebody wanted to come out and do service design, how would they do that?
Well, I'm actually learning it as well. So I've got lots of experience in design in general, and I've been through, like, it's quite the journey if you look back at my career. I started as a print designer. Technically, I started as a college student, as a print student, running presses, so a printer.
Okay.
Because I came out of high school, and our high school happened to be a technical school that had printing as its major. So I learned how to run all kinds of crazy presses and did all kinds of technical things. I really loved it. Went into college doing that, and the funny thing was I had a designer's mindset. So when I got into classes with other designers, because the technical college where I went to school required us to do cross training, so I ended up in these design classes with designers, and they're like, "What are you doing in printing, Mike? You should be a designer." So then I switched. So I first became a print designer, so did that for many years, and then I was really fascinated by the web, and I just personally just started to explore. I started to play with terrible visual software development tools, and then realized how bad the code was that they generated, and then challenged myself to get a copy of BB-Edit, which is a text editor, and learn HTML, CSS. Well, at the time CSS didn't exist, but HTML from scratch, and build things in code, and then preview in a browser. So I sort of went through that whole process as a huge shift, and became web designer. Still maintaining all the print design stuff like logos and icons and understanding that stuff. Then I was really fascinated by this user experience, which was starting to rise. So I got a position at a company that did this work, and just had the opportunity to be around other people that were more experienced than me at doing research, at observational research especially, where you would build something, or you would evaluate software, or typically it was software, but it could be hardware. You would watch what they did, because if you did surveys and asked them questions, they would just tell you what they thought you wanted to hear, right? So by observing, you really see what people actually do, what they actually get hung up on, that was so fascinating. And so that's where I moved into user experience design.
Nice.
And then just last year did a big project inside the company where we did service design kind of design thinking stuff. And now I'm doing some training to really understand the process and how it fits and how we can apply it. So, it's definitely a learning opportunity for me. I'm by no means an expert, but the learning for me is fun. I've always been kind of a lifelong learner, so it's just another opportunity, I guess, to reinvent myself professionally.
Yeah, nice. Okay, so tell us. So you have all these things that you do, things that you're passionate about, things that you're interested in. You have your main day job, which is designer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's put that one over on the side, and let's say we're not going to say that one. But out of all the other things you do, writing books, teaching, speaking, illustrating, publishing, podcasting, what's your favorite of those? Like if all of the other ones, and I'm being, dramatic here. If all the other ones had to go away, which one would you keep?
I think teaching right now. I'm really super excited about teaching. 2 weeks ago, so let me go back a step. So I had been doing teaching for a couple of years. So teaching teachers in a lot of cases. Principals would call me in because their teachers bugged them enough to have me come in and teach the teachers how to understand sketchnoting, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
Yeah.
And so I would go in and teach them. And I really found that I enjoyed it. It's kind of funny because 2010, I was afraid to go on stage. I was not really the kind of person that wanted to go in front of people. And I look back at my life, and the thing that's typically works for me is I sort of put myself in a pickle, I say. So someone invited me to do a Pachachka talk, which, if you don't know what that is, it's sort of like an Ignite talk. The idea is pretty simple. You have 20 slides. They advance without your control, and you have to give a talk against them. Right.
Okay.
So if you do it right, you really practice a lot, and you set your slides up so they can help you. So I said, yes, I'll do it. I was like, oh, great. What did I do? And I did my Pachachka talk was about sketchnoting, about my story of sketchnoting, how I came into it, because that was really front of mind at the time. And so I did this talk in a little tiny place in Milwaukee, and I was really nervous when I did it. But I can still remember it was this moment where I'm telling my story, and I'd sort of gotten past all the energy of being afraid. And I looked out, and there's this crowd. It's a really dark room, and there's lights on people's faces, and I'm sharing this story. I'm like, wow, this is really cool. I could do this again. Like, there was just this moment, like, crystallized. And so that's what started all this stuff, and I just have continued to do that and try and get better. And lately, with the pandemic, I realized there was an opportunity to really do some experimentation and see, like, could I do this more intentionally? Because I had sort of been doing it, like, in person, it's one thing, but when you do it online, there's a lot more technical details you have to sort out, right? So when people would ask me to come on and do stuff, I would just accept and try stuff out. Like, I'm going to try hanging my iPhone over my desk and drawing. So I started playing with that, and then I'm going to buy some lights and do this next one, and then I'm going to get a new webcam, and I would just keep on adding little pieces. I would try to use what I had to do it, and then keep on improving. But I think even in spite of the technical stuff, it's really energizing. Like when I announced, I don't know, it was a month and a half ago that I would do this lettering course. I'd been thinking about it for a couple of months and sort of plotting it and planning it and thinking, what would I do? And when I got to the point where all the technical stuff, I felt pretty confident that it wouldn't be in the way. That's when I sort of said, yes, let's do it, and announced it. And I was just so energized, like writing the script, and like it was hard work, like really preparing it, because I want my students to really feel like I've put in the time, I've done the planning, I can answer questions. It's fast enough paced that it's not boring, and it's not so slow that you're falling asleep, or if it's not too fast that you're feeling like you're left behind. So there's this sort of a tension you're trying to always hold, and I just really so excited to do it. And it was definitely not perfect. There were things that went wrong and things I could improve on. But it's like, I'm excited for the next one, even though I know it's going to be a lot of work. And if I could do one thing, it would just be teaching.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. So let's go there. Let's get into sketchnoting. So I learned about sketchnoting at the same time I learned about you. To in my mind, you are sketchnoting. So if that's not true, dispel that myth. If that is true, confirm that. Take us into what sketchnoting is.
Gotcha. Well, that's a confirm. So I'll take you back to 2006, where I had somehow gotten into this mode where I felt like I had to take notes in a way that I hated taking notes, and I was really good at it. Like, that's just a terrible place to be. I had these giant 9x12 books, lined notebooks, and I used pencil, like a mechanical pencil, because of my concern for making mistakes and wanting to fix the mistakes. So I really hated taking notes, and I was really good at it. So I sort of always got caught doing it. But I said, I can't continue doing it this way. It's unsustainable. What should I do? And as a designer, I'm always faced with constraints. Sometimes I put constraints on myself, as I mentioned, doing the Pachachka talk and forcing myself to do public speaking or announcing this workshop, which made me do the work, right? So for me, that can be good as long as I don't put myself in too much of an unfixable situation. So in this case, nobody knew about it. It was just me. And it was the end of 2006. I said, I've got a conference I've signed up for in early 2007. What if I just change something up? I often call it like the George Costanza thing, the George Costanza episode where he does everything opposite.
Yeah.
And then suddenly he's got a beautiful girlfriend and a great job and, a new car or whatever. Like, it sort of turned out like that. So I just said, what if I just do everything the opposite? Instead of a big book, what if I use a small one? And it turns out that I just bought a Moleskine, these nice black Moleskine notebook, pocket notebook at the store because it was beautiful, but I never used it because it was too beautiful, right? And so I had this thing, like, okay, I'm going to use that. That's rule number one, got to use that book. Number two, I thought, okay, no more pencil. I'm going to go right to ink. And I happen to have G2, Pilot G2 pens around at the time. So that's my pen. All right, let's go to the conference. It was weird taking this really, really small kit along because I was used to much more substantial books. And part of the reason why I chose those things were a couple things. So the smaller book meant I couldn't write all the notes that I did before. So that took being a court reporter off the table. And then by switching from pencil to pen, it meant that I had to be really considerate about what I put on the page because I couldn't go back and erase it, right? So now suddenly I'm being very aware of what's happening. And the interesting thing was, because I was so used to taking notes that old way, suddenly I felt like I got nothing to do. Like, I'm just sitting here listening and analyzing. And what I realized was there was this really cool opportunity to analyze and edit in the moment, sort of real-time analysis and editing. And then when I would visualize what that meant, then I could draw it on the page. And I had still had free time. So then, as a designer, I've always loved lettering and typography. So I started doing lettering, and images were on the screen that I'd never noticed before because I was too busy writing stuff. Like, oh, that's a really interesting thing. And I would draw that in there, or some idea would pop in my head and I would draw that in. And suddenly at the end of it, I had these much more compact, almost like if you consider like the old notes I took, like, a giant pot of coffee, these are like a really great espresso with a crema, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's really, really good, right? Yeah. And so, what I would normally take, 8 huge pages was now compressed to maybe 4 that had lots of white space and drawings and lettering and stuff. And I could look at it in like 10 minutes and get the gist of the thing. Like, holy cow, what just happened here? And so I did that, and it was just such a revelation for me that I continued to do it. And the name for it just seemed right to be Sketchnotes. And I just started using that term and posting on Flickr at the time, which was the hot social media. Yeah. And the interesting dynamic around it, so there are a couple things happened. Speakers stumbled onto it because if I knew them on Flickr, I'd mention them. And they really liked it because they could see like what they presented and how it got received. So that's really good feedback for them. But the other interesting thing was people who were not at the event, because it was in Chicago, like about an hour and a half train ride for me from Milwaukee. People from like Australia and London and Germany were, oh, this is really cool. I get the gist of the thing you attended. This is really helpful to me. Like, but you weren't there. Like, I don't get it. So what I realized was it was really valuable as a feedback tool. First of all, it was important for me because I could actually absorb the notes that I was taking. It was helpful for feedback for the speakers, but then it would actually spoke to people who weren't there because it was a good compression of the idea. Now, of course, it had my own opinion. It was for me first and for them second. But that was the moment where I realized, okay, this is bigger. This is bigger than me. And it wasn't much long after that where I had been doing it for a couple of years, practicing it, and I noticed other people were doing it too. They saw the work and they were doing it. And a lot of times I didn't know who they were. Like, they must have seen my work or just had the same idea. And so there was sort of this crisis moment. I was like, oh no, this thing that I feel like I sort of came up with, other people are doing it. What should I do? Like, should I be chasing them down? And like, it's not my personality. It's not my style. So I just started to make friends with them and build a community, because I've always been really community minded because of my background and the way I think about things. So just started building this community of friends that also did it. And, next thing you know, it's 2009 now. And I started noticing there was not really any place you could go to find sketchnotes. If you wanted to find them, you just sort of had to scour around the internet. Social media had started coming together, then Twitter and some other things. So you could go there, but it was a pain to find them. So I thought, well, what if I come up with something like Sketchnote Army? What if there's a place where you can just go? So that happened in 2009. And then not long after that, I was invited by PeachBit to produce a book to teach the concepts. That was 2012. And did that book. It sold really well, continues to sell well. And so that's really the story of it. And at the core of it, sketchnotes are really note-taking that's focuses a lot more on including visualization in the sketchnotes. So you're still writing text. It's not like you're abandoning text at all. It's much more of a combination of text and imagery together. There's been some people that suggest that the mixing of imagery and text together makes them both stronger. It's almost like a mesh, right? They sort of reinforce each other. So that can be a benefit, which assists with retention and memory. And you're doing this analysis and conceptualizing ideas, which is really valuable. And it's just a mix of writing and typography. I kind of mentioned this in drawing. It's just this mix of those three in a variety of ways. It can take all different shapes, and I really love that it's really flexible and malleable, that everybody can sort of adapt it to the way they feel like it makes sense for them. And there's nothing wrong with that, which is really great. It makes it very adaptable for lots of people in different situations. And, looking back now, I'm glad that I kept it really flexible that way, because so many people could find an adaptation and make it fit their needs. So anyone from a physicist to a school teacher can make use of this tool, which is really great.
So for the third chair out there, I'll have links to the stuff Mike's talked about, and I'll also have a link to whatever he thinks is the best intro video to what an actual sketchnote would be. But one of the questions I have for you, and maybe this is what you would teach in your workshop, so maybe we'll give people an example of what they would learn from coming to one of your workshops. But it's like, my immediate thought goes, can I keep up? Right? Like, if I'm doing this in the middle of a talk, I feel like the speaker or the presenter is going to get ahead of me. Like, can I keep up? Can you keep up? Can people keep up?
I think you can, to a degree. And again, it depends on, I always say context really matters. So if you're in a board meeting where critical details are important, maybe there's a much more focus on the text and the detail. Maybe it makes sense not even to do sketch notes in there if you're just if you're charged with taking the minutes. Like, maybe it's better that you just type them, right? Because it's serving a different purpose. But I sort of look at sketchnoting as almost like a slider. So if you think of pure text on one end of the slider and pure drawing on the other end of the slider, and typically you're sliding that slider somewhere between those two based on the context. So if I'm doing a TED Talk, I could slide that sucker all the way over to the visuals a lot more. Maybe it's just one drawing with all kinds of annotations around the drawing, right? That can be, I've got some freedom. And then you push to the other side. Maybe you're in a physics class, or maybe you're taking meeting minutes. Maybe that's more text, and then it's annotated with imagery that's sort of sprinkled in there. Maybe that makes more sense, right? So I like that there's sort of this flexibility to adapt to the context, and not such a rigidity that it has to do it this way, and if it doesn't qualify if you don't do it that way. So it's kind of the way I think about it.
Yeah. Okay. So put your teacher hat on and your sketchnote hat on. Wear those both at the same time for me. So
Okay.
in my classroom, I teach engineering and math. Like primarily, most of my classes are engineering and math.
Mm-hmm.
I don't find that students overtake notes. I find that students just sit there. Right?
Yeah.
Like most of the students, they're just sitting there. Some of them are distracted by what they're doing, on their phone or on their computer or whatever it is. Others are trying to write down everything you say.
Mm-hmm.
And in my mind, I would love to encourage them and or require them to do something like Sketchnote, right? Like something on the scale of it. But I understand that it's going to resonate with certain people and it's not going to resonate with other people. So what is what's the risk? Let's put it that way. What's the risk for me as a teacher if I require them to do this for 4 weeks, 3 weeks, or whatever it is, just to like practice the skill? And because I don't want to do it just once. One and done is, in my mind, it's not worth it.
Mm-hmm.
So half of the semester, like, I mean, do you see a major problem with me trying to do that?
Actually, I don't think so, and I think it depends on how you structure it and what the rewards are for doing it or not doing it. I did a podcast a couple of years ago where I talked to a woman who teaches art at California College of Art, I think it is, and what she does is she requires them to do sketch notes, but she doesn't grade them, and they don't have to be perfect.
Mm-hmm,
And they simply are done or not done.
Yeah.
Sketch note, check, you've qualified, right? And so it takes a little bit of pressure off because there's already, like I said, the challenge of feeling like you can't draw. If that's pretty strong, that can be a resistance. So, and I think I like the way you're thinking about it, is framing it as sort of an experiment where we're going to try this for 4 weeks. We'll give you training so you can see what it is. Mm-hmm. And that maybe what your sketch notes look like are a lot simpler, right? And maybe, like we talked about that slider, maybe in your students' case, maybe they're doing a lot more writing and it's sort of annotating, drawing things in the columns on the side, right? So you sort of how do you take the pressure down? Because there's nothing worse than, thinking it's going to do well and there's too much pressure on the student and then they fail at it and they'll never do it again. When if you sort of let them sort of dabble their toe and see the benefit, like, oh, that was kind of cool, that was fun, then it sort of encourages them to do more of it, I think.
Well, and for a good portion of them, I don't care what they do, it's better than what they're currently doing, right? Like, because they're currently not doing anything. They're just some of them are listening and some of them are just spaced out. So okay, so that makes a lot of sense. Now, you could have done all this, right? Like, you could have kept posting your individual things, developed Sketchnote Army, written your books, right? Rode that train, spoke, all that stuff. Why did you start actually doing YouTube videos, and why did you start actually doing podcasts?
Well, I think deep at the core of it was that realization way back in 2006. Like, I have real pain. This is a real burden to me. Taking notes is a burden and a pain, and I didn't really have a good solution until I did this experiment. And when I solved it, I thought, wow, if this is a problem for me, this has got to be a problem for somebody else, and I need to share this idea. Because there's probably somebody else who's challenged with the same things that I'm challenged with, and they don't know how to get out of it. And it's really important that I share this, because that might be the difference between them doing it and not doing it, making it and not making it, or who knows who I might unlock by providing these ideas, right? So that's deep at the core of it, is just a sort of love of getting this out to people, and the realization that I think the other thing that I believe in is that people have much more capability to do things than they give themselves credit for. So the idea that you can't draw and so therefore you don't do it at all, it just seems like there's got to be a way to get people moving past that. And so the reason why I love community, the reason why I promote other people that do the same thing I do, is because I feel like the ultimate goal is getting people to realize they have the capability to do visualization, which is drawing or sketchnoting or whatever, and it can help them think better. And how they get to it, I really don't care. Like, if you want to come and watch my stuff or take my course, that's great. If you want to read my book, if somebody else's book appeals to you more than mine, awesome. Like, I love having lots of voices in the space, because maybe you don't resonate with me. Maybe somebody else is a better person for you to, like, they get you or they explained it. I've heard that before. And that's why you have to have so many different voices explaining that core concept. So that's really what's underneath it all, is probably the realization that people have the capability to do more than they think they can, and I just want to reveal that. And it's really fun when they see it. Like when they actually see it, that's like the most fun.
Yeah. So I'm unpacking your life, if you will, right? And we're not going to get necessarily super personal because we're going to stay like the professional side. So you're working as a designer, sketchnoting, and the Sketchnote army and all this Sketchnote stuff comes up, and it's at first just like something you're doing for you. Then it turns into a more like community-based hobby, if you will, right? Then you start writing books, and now it becomes sort of a small business on some level. So it's very entrepreneurial in the way it's happening. My question for you is what people who find themselves in that situation, right? Like, what would you recommend that they do? Like, how do you balance all of this? Because it's not like, you also have your family, right? Like, how do you balance doing all these things? You've found this really cool thing that's adding value to people's lives. You want to keep it moving forward, but you got to manage everything else. What's your recommendation there?
I don't know. It's not easy, especially with, family, to make sure that I'm providing time. I try to make sure, I guess it's sort of making good decisions about what I choose to do, which is not, I don't know that I always make those decisions as well as I wish. When I look back, like, I could have done a better job at that, or that thing, I spent all those hours and it didn't turn out like I want. But I guess on the other hand, I always look at every experiment, whether it fails or succeeds, as teaching me something. That's what I got from my dad, right? This idea, like, what did we learn? Like, okay, we just broke the thing. Now, what did we learn about that? Right? That's always been, I can hear him echoing in the back of my head, right? So there's learning, even when it's a failure. And I think it's tough. Like, I think there's also this idea that I've learned where you can appear to be more places, like someone will say to me, well, you seem like you're everywhere, right? And it's just like, I'm just in the right places
at the right
and have made good choices, right, about things. There's lots of things. Like, I severely limit what I do on social media. In fact, during the pandemic, just recently, I just felt like I would end up on Facebook doom scrolling. Like, what am I doing here? I usually don't look at Facebook. Like, I look at it much more as a business. Like, I look at all the comments to make sure I'm answering questions, number one. And then, just checking to see how things are doing. But I never even evaluate, like, posts like, oh, that one didn't get a lot of likes. Like, that doesn't really matter to me so much. Mm-hmm. So I found myself, like, during the pandemic, like, doing things uncharacteristic for me. I'm sure it's got to do with stress, right? So so recently I just, on my iPad and my phone, I just deleted Facebook because I don't intend to spend a lot of time there. I can certainly check it in a browser, and it just adds that little friction. So I think it's sort of picking what's important and then reevaluating. So I'll go back and look, and this thing that I'm thinking about doing, like, I don't really love it. There's a book I just got recently from the guy that did CD Baby. I can't think of his name right now. It's escaping me. And the title of the book is Hell Yeah or No. So it's like this really extreme, right? Like, either you're all in and you're gonna go for it, or you're not even gonna touch it. And I think as I get older, as I have a family, as I have to make choices, like, the challenge of, like, success, is whatever that means, is what are you going to choose to do with the success? Like, where are you going to invest your time? Because, now I get all kinds of requests to do stuff. So I have to be careful about what I accept, because I could just be working all the time. Yeah. And then my family suffers, and, I've got to do my job. So the other challenge is you could do a day job all day and do stuff all night and spend a little time with the family, and then you'll burn yourself out. So I have to be careful about that too. So it's I don't know if I've got the magic bullet, but I think it's just being very deliberate about what you choose to do, and then reevaluating pretty often to make sure is that still true?
Yeah, is that still true? All right. So what's the next step, right? And you don't have to. I'm not asking you to give away anything. You're not going to anyhow. But what's the next big thing in the sketchnoting world? What's the next big thing in the Mike Rohde doing fun creative projects world?
Well, it's some of the same stuff. It's I'm doing a lot less of the doing. So I do occasionally, I'll do stuff around sketchnoting. I'll sketchnote webinars or something. And I think something that's actually relates to the last question is, if it's interesting to me, then I'll do it. Like if I can learn something from it, or it's an interesting space, like I never thought it was that interesting, and this is really interesting, like that will attract me. So those are sort of my criteria now. And I think what I really like doing is teaching. So I think I've stumbled onto this live teaching thing. There's something about the, I don't know, improv nature of doing it live, that things could and do go wrong. And yet still being able to sort of hold the moment and teach and pace and all that is really fun for me. Like I can't describe why that is. For some people that could be like a complete nightmare, you know. I don't know why it's interesting to me, but I sort of look at some of the courses, you know, and I take courses. I'm a member of a bunch of different things and I do learning, but I find in myself, like sometimes I have this really strong desire when I buy the course, and then I find I just don't have the stick-to-itiveness to go with it. Like there's no accountability. I think that's the challenge with courses is it's hard to do accountability well.
Yes.
You know, Seth Godin talks about the problem of online courses is that same thing, and which is why he restructured and came up with Alt MBA, which is more of a cohort-based, lots of, you know, pressure between the students to make it go, and it's project-based, right? So that's why I look toward the live stuff, because there's something about like the commitment to be there live is different. And the interesting thing about it is you do the live event, and if you record it, which I'm trying to get better at, you now have an artifact which has probably almost the same value as the live thing. And the students can watch it again and again, or you can sell it as a thing. So you sort of have the benefit of the course, but it's more focused around the live thing. So that's sort of the place that I'm excited about, and trying to decide what are the content that would be most valuable to do in that way.
Yeah, and you talk about value to the people that want to learn that thing too, right? Because some people want to be at that live event and they learn really well there, and then other people are like, no, I want the recorded because I can rewind it. You know, like every 5 minutes I can rewind. Every 5 minutes I can rewind, and I see that all the time. You know, especially as you know we're going into more remote type learning. You know, due to the nature of the way things are right now. I have certain students who are like, I need to be sitting in front of you, and then I have other students who are like, nope. I'd much rather watch the video, right? Like, I want to hear what you have to say, but I don't want to hear it live because I can engage with it differently and better. Yeah. All right, so as we move through, right? One of the things I want my guests to be able to do is share something cool on the internet with us, right? So, in your mind, what's a cool thing that you've found on the internet, you know, in the last year, in the last 6 months, that you'd want other people to know about?
Something that I find really interesting. So this comes back to my teaching and the nerdiness of the technology, is as a teacher and as someone who likes to do live stuff, the place where I've learned the most are from game streamers. Like my kids watch these gamer streamer guys, and you know, it's real easy. Like some of the ones that my son will watch, they like scream in the mic and it just like over the top, like the personality stuff, right? But if you look past it, some of these really advanced streamers are really, really smart, and they technically are really great resources. You know, I'm not going to become a game streamer. That's not my thing. But there is a lot that I have learned from them about webcams, like quality web. Like I learned there's a Logitech C920, which is 8 years old, and it's still like the gold standard for most streamers, right? It's crazy that this old technology still holds up. And there finally are some cameras that are coming along to compete with them, and that some of these guys have like $5,000-$6,000 mirrorless full frame cameras going into like monster PCs with cooling racks and stuff and lights, and they have all these boards on their desk so they can do transitions, and it's like they literally have like a TV broadcast studio in their rooms to do the streaming. But those are the guys, when I looked at a new webcam to upgrade my webcam for this stuff, those are the guys I look to first. If I was considering, like, my wife's got a nice Sony camera for the once in a while that I do that, is it worth getting a cam link for that? Like, and I did all these reviews, and these guys know the stuff inside and out, and they explain it, and they do testing, like they're really into it, and they're super valuable. And it was like just this interesting resource I would have never, if you would have told me I would be doing research with game streamers, I would have never guessed it. And it's really valuable information if that's, so I think what I'm sort of getting at is you can learn a lot about adjacent spaces if you know how to extract the things that are valuable to you. Like I said, I'm not going to be a game streamer, but there is some really valuable information, like the things that they want, maybe I don't want, but that they revealed to me, like, well, this core set of features that's the webcam that I want. It was really clear, right? Because they did all that work. So don't be afraid to look in adjacent spaces for information to help you, because sometimes that can be the best place to go.
Yeah, and I'll double down on that with you is even the style of the way they're doing things, right? Like, especially if you're looking at the ones that are popular, there's a portion of the reason they're popular is because of what they're doing, right? It's the game, it's their personality, whatever it is. But then the other portion is because they're telling stories in compelling ways,
yes.
or they're making content in compelling ways. And what can you glean out of the way they're telling those stories or the way they're making that content? Yeah, I find that really fascinating. And mine isn't necessarily gamers. Mine's more with like technology people, like technology YouTubers and that kind of stuff. It's like, okay, what are they really trying to do here? Oh, it actually has nothing to do with the headphones. It has everything to do with all of these other factors that they're talking about in that system. So that's awesome. Mine, I want to do this as well, right? If I'm going to put you on it, but I've had a chance. I actually just learned about this this morning, but there's a writing app online. It's called the Most Dangerous Writing App, I think is what it's called. and the way this app works is you set your criteria. So I either say, like, I want to write 1,000 words, or I want to write for 10 minutes or 5 minutes or 100 words or whatever it is. And basically you start writing, and if you like slow down, the words start to disappear, right? And if you slow down enough, or if you stop writing enough, the words completely go away. And it's not like you can hit Control-Z and get them back. Like, they're gone. So if you're 900 words into your 1,000-word goal and you don't finish, all of that goes away, completely goes away. And I was like, wow, that is scary and a really, really interesting tool, because a lot of that is words on paper, right? Like, a lot of writing is just getting the words down, and then writing is revision. So you just revise and you revise and you revise and you revise. So it's like I love the idea of that app, and it's like, man, I can't imagine trying to do it though, setting targets and then trying to up your target and up your target and up your target to do that kind of stuff. So
it could be an interesting twist on that one, where instead of the words disappearing, so let's say that you pick a cadence, whatever your cadence is, X words per minute or something, and if you maintain the cadence between some range, the app is free. But if you slow down or you speed up, like you get sloppy, then you got to pay, and you have to pay it, right? Like if you go slow down, then you got to pay money, and you're trying to maintain a speed, because at the end you would have to pay maybe you don't even have control of it. It's you have to sign up. You sign up with PayPal or something, and it automatically gets sucked out of your account, right?
Yeah, that's even another, because I've seen apps like that where you put your credit card in early, and if you don't hit your targets, whatever you establish as your targets, like whether it's working out, 5 times a week, or, drinking a glass of water every day, or whatever it is, if you don't hit your targets, then they donate, $5 to charity or whatever it is out of your account. So yeah, that's awesome. Well, Mike, I appreciate having you on. I appreciate you telling us about, your journey. I appreciate you telling us about sketchnoting. Is there anything else you'd like folks to know as we kind of wrap things up here?
I would say if you're thinking about doing sketchnoting, if it's something you're curious about, my big word for you is have grace for yourself, especially in this time, right? In the COVID time, where there's enough pressure already. You don't need to add more pressure to yourself. Is to give grace for yourself. When you start it, maybe date that, and when the first one you do, hide it away somewhere. And if you continue it, pull it out in 6 months and see how much progress you've made. I think that's really the key to learning, is sort of, I'll take this back to what I learned in writing a book, because a book you can't really pull an all-nighter and do a book, really. Like, it's too big of a project if you're doing a good-sized book. The thing I learned about writing a book was I needed to be happy with what I produced today. Like, I have to do my best. I have to sit down and put in the work, and whatever that was, some days I would be like, I wish I had done more, but the day's gone. I got to go to sleep now. And then tomorrow I got to work, and then after work I can work on it again. And the thing that I found most helpful was just being happy with what I produced and knowing that I would take another shot at it tomorrow. And that was really what made it happen, was that every day hitting it and doing more and making progress, pushing the rock farther.
Yeah.
And then suddenly, next thing you know, it's like, wow, the book is done. How'd that happen? Then now you have a new challenge, and that is promoting the book, which is sometimes as hard or maybe harder than actually writing the book, right? So, but that's a good mindset to have, is just making progress, celebrating the progress, learning from it, and then hitting it again tomorrow.
Yeah, that's great. I'm actually going to put that into practice starting as soon as possible, because that makes a lot of sense. Sometimes I get down and it's like, oh, I wanted to do XYZ today, and for whatever reason it didn't happen. It's like, no, just be happy that you got that thing organized or whatever. So yeah, okay, that's good. I like that. I like that advice. All right, Mike. So if people want to learn more about you, if they want to connect with you or anything like that, where would you point them?
I would say probably the primary place would be rohdesign.com, rohtesign.com. That's my page. It's got a blog on there. I've got about information. You can see what Sketchnotes are. You can see my books. You can see my sketchbook. And then there's links to all my social media there, which typically if you look around for the handle Rohdesign, you'll find me on Twitter, Instagram, other places. So that would be the place to point to. And then from there you can find everything else.
Thanks to Mike for coming on the show, and thank you for listening. If you want to find out more, you can find us on Twitter at ThroughTheCruft or at our website, throughthecruft.com. If you enjoyed the show, please consider reviewing it and sharing it with your friends. Thanks.